We're
Okay,
moving on to Mr. Chris Chase. Chris is the general manager at Inner Ocean Systems in San Diego. He's been closely involved with the development of the Sleuth line of spill detection sensors and systems. And Chris is going to give us an update on the Sleuth and applied uses of ultraviolet sensor technology for spill prevention and response. Chris, it's all yours.
Hi, can you hear me and can you see my screen?
I can see your screen and I can hear you. Yes.
Great. Good news. Thanks. That was a really interesting presentation. A lot to cover there. And good morning, everybody. I'm Chris Chase. I'm General Manager and Business Development Manager for Inner Ocean Systems located in San Diego, California. We've been working on spill prevention technologies for the last 15 years or so. And I view our objective as being risk reduction and the prevention of spills by using continuous monitoring and leak detection systems with a heavy focus on prevention. I'm an adherent to the ounce of prevention versus pound of cure approach. And in this age of technology and remote communication, it's more viable than ever to arrest a lot of oil before it reaches the outside environment, which saves on many fronts, environmentally, from a corporate perspective, including at industrial sites such as those pictured in this graphic. Everywhere that there's oil that's used, transported, processed, transferred, produced. I've shared some of this information in the past, but it's worth emphasizing that what gets a lot of attention are the headline, Macondo type spills and tanker failures. But in fact, roughly 2/3 of oil pollution reaches the marine environment from land-based sources, meaning it's coming from a point source that can be guarded against accidental releases for the most part. So vessels and rigs aren't actually the largest source of oil that reaches the marine environment and environment in general. The primary drivers for people adopting our technology and similar technologies for oil spill prevention and early warning detection are to reduce risks, to guard against the cost of response and cleanup, to protect their corporate image. There's a growing trend for many years now for corporate social responsibility. There are regulatory drivers like the spill prevention, control, and countermeasure plans at facilities that store and handle and transport oil. And in recent years, there's more and more of a trend that I've seen in industry, whereas, rather than just mitigating the risk or guarding against some financial burden as a result of an accidental release, there's the adoption of a zero tolerance approach in the use of best available technologies and best management practices. And I would say it's very site specific and company specific where that type of progressive approach is being adopted, but it should be commended because that indeed adopts the preventative mindset and approach. Our technology, which I'll just touch on quickly, is an optical sensor. It's a UV fluorometer. It's a point sensor that you put in strategic locations to monitor for oil on the ground or water surface. It doesn't see a wide area. It sees very specific points. So strategic placement of the sensors is critical, and we have a variety of different packages and sensor types for different applications. There are similar technologies that float in the water using capacitance and electromagnetic type detection. There are methods for attempting to measure if there's leaks from pipelines using mass and pressure and temperature calculations. There's our UV optical type of system. There's infrared cameras and radars, not pictured here. Inside plants, they use flow-through type systems. And not unlike what she just demonstrated in the subsea systems, looking again using UV to see oil in a water column. And there's satellite, which I saw there's several presentations about that, and remote sensing from aircraft to look at spills on water. I do a lot of site visits and consultation to help bring technology to bear and best practices to bear on how to minimize the risk of spills. And I've adopted sort of a heat mapping approach where you look at the probability of the spill and the relative consequences. And in fact, it's not a straight line curve, because a small amount of oil in specific areas can have a much more pronounced effect than in other areas, such as close to bird nesting or turtle nesting or tourist beaches or marshy areas where it's hard to clean up, et cetera, et cetera. So not all spills are created equal. I think as most everybody in this type of workshop is well aware. In practice, I considered various inputs and sources of information and trying to matricize and assess where's the best place. Usually I'm thinking about placement of our sensors, but the general use of technology. So where could the oil come from? What's the watershed like? How does the oil reach the outside environment if it's coming from a point source? What regulations are in fact? Is an environmental sensitivity index is a very useful tool to assess the more significant damage risk at certain locations versus other locations. Proximity to navigational waterways that drives a lot of our regulations, et cetera, et cetera. It's really tailored to each application, each user, each stakeholder's objectives in an effort to assess and prevent spills. But basically a risk assessment tool that can be utilized very effectively to help mitigate the risk of spills or to strategically place early warning sensors in order to minimize any impacts if an accident does occur. In practice, for example, at a tank farm, you could consider each tank a potential point source. They typically, or in all cases, bunded. So there's a physical containment dike. Those dikes all have to be drained. Those drains can be monitored, or to look at an entire area inshore, you could go to the outfalls, and that's also an opportunity to place a sensor, to pre-position a boom so that if oil is detected at that fail-safe location, the response can be implemented in near real term, much sooner, and with equipment already pre-positioned and a plan in place, greatly reducing the effects of an accidental release. This is one example of many of how this type of strategy can be used. Some examples, really I've just got some photos of installation scenarios where this type of strategy is used in practice. So we've been supporting a lot of sites recently in the West Texas where they have production areas and pump stations. They're typically unmanned, very remote locations. Although it's a dry, arid area, there are creeks and rivers nearby, which is when an accidental release occurs, that's where it tends to migrate, and that's, spreads the damage. So in this case, the users at each of these sites build a containment berm and then install sensor at key at the drainage or drainage points. One of these drainage points can look like this. This is a different application along a natural gas pipeline. It's adjacent to a creek. The sensor peers through into a containment sump, a small containment pit, which has a valve that's normally closed. It operates off a float switch. So when it fills with water, the water is released to the creek. But if oil is detected, a remote alarm is sent. Personnel can respond within a relatively short period of time to this unmanned site and take care of the issue with no oil having reached the environment at all, saving the frogs and tadpoles and birds and vegetation and the cost of cleanup. Down in Key West, this is an example of an above ground storage tank terminal that supports the military base there. Jet fuel, obviously a sensitive area and one to be protected. Floating roof tanks drain rainwater down through the tank, through a hose that transits the tank and is valved at the foot of the tank. And when those lines leak, weep, or fail, that's the source of a spill that can reach the environment. Also pictured here are the piers, which are other locations, but specific to the floating roof tanks. For those unfamiliar, there's this valved flange that comes out the bottom of the tank. That's the stormwater drainage. They have to open the valve on the roof, or they could founder the roof, which is also a big problem, big cost factor, and a potential environmental disaster. There were a lot of failed roofs during the Hurricane Harvey in Houston that many of us saw photos of and are familiar with. So you can see the dynamic of the water, but this flow chamber has a sensor on it. And if jet fuel in this case, or oil in many cases, is detected, shut the valve, remote alert. It doesn't go to the dike. You don't have to clean it up, and you can bring in a truck for proper disposal of the polluted water. Or if you start to see a weep, you can take the tank out of service on maybe ahead of schedule for inspections and possible replacement of the floating roof drain pipe or hose. Another example where sensors are arrayed on marine terminal piers, loading piers, and also inside of a terminal, showing a complete strategy for early warning detection and prevention of spills throughout a site that handles just a ton of fuel and oil. So it's not going to prevent accidents in all scenarios, but it's going to give early warning if an accident does occur, often at night, often in inclement weather, and is really a good example of how to try and use technology to foolproof any given facility associated with oil and the energy industry. And that's what our sensor looks like when used on a dolphin or a pier. So you've got all the pipelines transferring huge amounts of oil and fuel, the tanker vessels themselves. Really an ideal location. And after 15 years, I'm familiar with lots and lots of stories of a detection and somebody rubs their eyes and goes down and says, "Oh Lordy," but they find out right away and are able to address the issue and really reduce the downside risk. In some instances, these types of technologies are arrayed over a wide area, such as a port placed in strategic locations, monitoring particular terminals, facilities, fuel type facilities, and the data might go to the end user, the facility owner itself, might go to the port, or in some cases will be centralized to the vessel traffic system, where they have a manned 24 control room typically, and are monitoring ship movements and other data streams. Uh, This is one of a number of sensors installed at the Bolsa Chica wetlands, where you have a lot of production and also a sensitive habitat and a naturally preserved habitat in the tidal waters exchanges between the Pacific and this lagoon. And if oil is detected, then it shuts these giant tidal gates and traps the oil at the point that it's detected to minimize the impact of an accidental release at this production site in Southern California. Similarly, a sensor 24/7 operating in a marine terminal adjacent to the loading arms where tankers take on and discharge fuel and oil. The big advantage of this type of system is giving you continuous monitoring, particularly at nighttime, again, for early warning detection. These types of sensors are used on buoys, which can monitor a number of parameters. But for oil spill in the Middle East, the primary concern seems to have been through the years not ingesting oil to the desalination plants, which are their primary source of drinking water and fresh water. So in this case, they're monitoring the general environment for the occurrence of oil slicks on water so that they can shut the intakes and avoid ingesting hydrocarbons. Example on a loading. Yes. Some newer developments here at InterOcean, which should be representative of trends in the industry at all, and the increasing ability to monitor and prevent spills as technologies continue to evolve and to become more affordable. We now offer oil detection as a dedicated service where the equipment's provided and a monthly fee is charged rather than somebody having to buy, own, and operate the equipment themselves. There are more and more different types of platforms, buoys, and integrated systems for different types of applications. And the technologies evolved to take advantage of LED, which brings down the cost and is expanding the capability and reliability of the sensor in real world operation. Further, our current goal is to arm platforms in the North Sea, Gulf of Mexico, and around the world. There's a little bit of a gap in the technology where radars are used but aren't good for really early warning detection or prevention. There's other technologies evolving but not fully realized. That goes for our technology as well. The challenge is to be able to get up on the side of a platform and operate over big rolling waves and have the sensitivity to detect a sheen well below. It's a tough operating environment, and we are currently partnering with San Diego State University with their physics and geochemistry departments and some principal investigators to try and make a step change in the technology that we're bringing to market. And I'll circle back to the Refugio spill, which I believe reached the shoreline from this very culvert pictured in the top left from pipelines or an industrial facility just on the other side of the 101 highway there. Many of you might be familiar with the site. It was an unfortunate spill. That's a good example of where not to have a spill because of the impact and the visibility. Not that any place is good, but this certainly got a lot of attention and had some type of automated containment, some sort of a dike right here with automated detection and a valve that could be closed for not great expense. The entire spill could have been prevented. So I just like to point to this as an example of well, missed opportunity. I think that's a fair comment. To bring just a tiny bit of levity to an industry, I suppose, doesn't have a whole lot of humor. This was a cartoon I found during the Gulf of Mexico spill, Macondo. Certainly is a mess down there. There ought to be some way to avoid that. Yeah, like an oily warning device. And that's really my passion and where my focus is, bringing that type of technology to bear on prevention of spills versus response. And I thank everyone again for your time, and for the other presenters, all participants. It's a very worthy cause. Good to see and be a part of.
All right, thank you, Chris. And I have a quick question for you. All right, you showed Bolsa Chica and referenced Refugio. Now, as a Californian, why do you think that these types of technology are not more widely used here in California?
I mean, it's a pretty good question. I don't have a perfect answer. It's kind of a head scratcher to me, because starting into this, I focused a lot of energy on meetings in California and sites in California, my own backyard, and where I want to protect. And with California having a very progressive environmental reputation, air quality and such. But, I think it's because the facilities are all left to their own devices. So there's not really that strong a regulatory driver. In other places, like our biggest markets became South Korea and China. But by far, I think that, I don't know if it's a little bit more authoritarianism, or if California, talks a little bit bigger game than we put into practice. But there's one underlying theme, is that it's prevention and response, oil spill prevention and response, California Department of Fish and Game. But it seems like, because there's more money in response and there's more industry built in response, maybe there's just more thinking and asset, and investment and emphasis on response versus prevention. Maybe we're overlooking the prevention aspect of this. So, I would suggest that as a attempt at an answer.
Okay, good enough.
Yeah.
This brings us exactly on time. And thank you again, Chris.
Oh, good. Thank you.